I never imagined that at 70 years old, I would feel like a stranger in my own son's life. That is not how I thought my story would unfold. When you are young, you believe that if you love deeply enough, if you sacrifice enough, if you give everything you have to your family, then one day, when your hair turns silver and your steps slow down, you will be surrounded by warmth. You imagine laughter in your home, voices calling your name, a seat waiting for you at every table. I believed that. For most of my life, I lived by that belief. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I have spent over 4 decades in Savannah, Georgia, in a modest home, tucked along a quiet street, lined with oak trees draped in Spanish moss. It is not the kind of house that turns heads, but it has always been enough. Enough for love, enough for memories, enough for a family. Every wall in that house carries a piece of my life. The faint marks on the kitchen door frame where we measured my son's height as he grew. The worn armchair in the living room where my husband Daniel used to sit every evening reading the newspaper with his glasses slipping down his nose. The small crack in the hallway tile that Daniel promised to fix for years but never did, and somehow I never wanted it repaired because it meant he was still there, in a way. Daniel and I were not wealthy people. We built our lives slowly, carefully, with patience and discipline. He worked long hours as a clerk at the shipping office, and I spent my days in the school library, helping children discover worlds far beyond the small town they lived in. We did not have much, but we had enough, and we had each other. But the greatest gift of our lives did not come easily. For 6 years, we waited for a child. 6 long years of hope followed by quiet disappointment. Every month brought the same cycle. Hope, then silence, dreams, then tears. I still remember the nights I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I would ever hear a child call me mother. Daniel never lost faith. He would hold my hand and say, "It will happen when it's meant to happen." And then, one spring morning, it did. Marcus was born on a bright, warm day that seemed to carry a promise with it. I remember the moment Daniel first held him. His hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming weight of love. He looked down at that tiny boy and whispered something I will never forget. "This boy will be everything we dreamed of." And for many years he was. Marcus was a quiet child at first, always watching, always observing, but there was a brightness in him, a curiosity that made him different. He would sit on the floor of the library while I worked, flipping through picture books long before he could read. By the time he was 6, he was already asking questions I sometimes struggled to answer. By 10, he was helping other children with their homework. By 16, he was talking about college, about the future, about building something bigger than what we had. Daniel was so proud of him. We both were. But pride, I have learned, can sometimes blind you. We gave Marcus everything we could. Every extra hour we worked, every small luxury we gave up, every decision we made, it was all for him. When he wanted to attend a better school, Daniel picked up extra shifts. When he needed tutoring, I stayed up late helping him study, even after long days at work. When he dreamed of studying finance, of building a career in the world of numbers and investments, we found a way to support him, even when it meant stretching ourselves thin. I never once thought of it as a sacrifice. To me, it was simply love, because that is what mothers do. We give. We give without counting. We give without expecting anything in return. Or at least, that is what I believed. Marcus grew into a man faster than I was ready for. He left for college, then for graduate school, and eventually built a career that took him into a world far different from the one Daniel and I knew. He became successful, respected, admired, everything we had hoped for. But success has a way of changing people, not always suddenly, not always in ways you can see right away. Sometimes it happens quietly, slowly, almost gently, until one day you look at someone you love and realize they are no longer the same person you once knew. But back then, I did not see it. Back then, I only saw my son, my little boy who used to run into my arms after school. The boy who once told me, "Mom, I'll always take care of you." I held on to that version of him, even as time began to prove otherwise. Because when you are a mother, you do not let go easily. You hold on, even when everything around you begins to change. And at 70 years old, sitting in that quiet house filled with memories, I still believed that love was enough. I still believed that everything we had built as a family would somehow remain unshaken. I did not yet understand that sometimes the hardest truth you will ever face is this: love does not always guarantee loyalty, and family does not always mean forever. If I am being honest, the change did not happen all at once. There was no single moment I could point to and say, that's when everything shifted. It was quieter than that, subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, like a door slowly closing, inch by inch, until one day you realize it has been shut for a long time. After Marcus graduated, everything moved quickly. He found a job in the city, a position at a financial firm that demanded long hours and sharp focus. At first, I admired his dedication. I told myself this was what success looked like: busy schedules, late nights, endless responsibility. And in the beginning, he still called. Not every day, but often enough. "Hey Mom, just checking in. I'll come by this weekend. Don't forget to take your vitamins." Small things, simple things, but they mattered, because they reminded me that no matter how far he went, he was still my son, still connected, still present. But then, over time, those calls became shorter, then less frequent, then occasional. Sometimes weeks would pass before I heard his voice. I told myself not to take it personally. He's building his life, I would say. He has responsibilities now. He's doing exactly what we raised him to do. And I believed that. I wanted to believe that. Then came Vanessa. I remember the first time Marcus introduced her to me. She was elegant, well-spoken, confident in a way that filled the room without her needing to say much. She carried herself like someone who had never had to struggle for anything, and there was nothing wrong with that. At least, that is what I told myself. She greeted me politely, smiled, complimented my home, and thanked me for dinner. Everything about her was correct. perfect, even. But something about her made me uneasy. Not anything she said, not anything she did, just a feeling. A quiet voice inside me whispered, "This will change things." I ignored that voice because I wanted Marcus to be happy, because I trusted him, and because I believed that love, real love, would not push family aside. Their relationship moved quickly. Within a year, they were engaged. The wedding was beautiful, elegant, far more extravagant than anything Daniel and I could have ever imagined for ourselves. Vanessa's family handled most of the planning. They chose the venue, the decorations, and the guest list. I was included, of course, but not truly involved. I remember standing in the corner of that grand hall, watching everything unfold, feeling like a guest at my own son's wedding. I smiled, I clapped, I said all the right things, but deep down, something felt different, like I was slowly being moved to the edges of his life. After the wedding, that feeling grew stronger. Marcus and Vanessa moved into a beautiful home across town, a place with large windows, polished floors, and rooms that echoed when you spoke. He told me it was closer to his work, more convenient, and again, I understood, or at least, I told myself I did. At first they visited occasionally, then less, then only on holidays. And even then, the visits felt rushed, like something they needed to check off their list before returning to their real lives. "Mom, we can't stay long. Vanessa's parents are expecting us. We have an early morning tomorrow." There was always something. Always somewhere else they needed to be. I began to notice the way Vanessa's presence shaped everything. Where they went, who they spent time with, what mattered. Her family hosted large gatherings, elegant dinners, celebrations filled with laughter and expensive wine. Marcus seemed comfortable there, confidence, at ease in a way I had not seen since he was younger, and I told myself that was a good thing, that he had found a place where he belonged. But slowly, I realized that place was no longer with me. There were moments that stayed with me, small ones, easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention. Like the time I called him just to hear his voice, and he said, "Mom, I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back?" He never did. Or the afternoon I prepared his favorite meal, hoping he might stop by, only to receive a message hours later. "Sorry, Mom, something came up." Or the holidays when he would arrive late and leave early, spending more time checking his phone than sitting at the table. None of those moments seemed important on their own, but together they began to form a pattern, a quiet, undeniable pattern. Distance. And still, I said nothing, because I did not want to be the mother who complained, the one who demanded attention, the one who made her son feel guilty for living his life. So I stayed silent. I adjusted. I made excuses for him, even when the truth was becoming harder to ignore. After Daniel passed away, that silence grew heavier. The house became quieter. The evenings are longer. The empty chair across from mine felt larger than it ever had before. Marcus came to the funeral. He stood beside me. He held my hand. And for a brief moment, I felt that connection again, that bond that no distance could break. But grief has a way of revealing what is real and what is not. After the funeral, life moved on. For him, for everyone, except me. The calls became even less frequent, the visits almost non-existent, and I found myself sitting alone more often than I cared to admit, replaying memories in my mind just to feel close to something that no longer existed. I would look at old photographs. Marcus as a child, Marcus as a teenager, Marcus smiling, laughing, reaching for my hand. And I would wonder, when did I become someone he only thought about when it was convenient? When did I become optional? Still, I held on to hope, because that is what mothers do. We hope, even when the evidence tells us otherwise. We believe that one day something will change, that one day they will remember, that one day they will come back, not out of obligation, but out of love. And as my 70th birthday approached, I held on to that hope more tightly than ever. I told myself this would be different, that this year he would show up, that this year I would matter. I did not know then that this would be the day everything finally became clear. The morning of my 70th birthday arrived quietly, too quietly. There was no sound of footsteps in the hallway, no voices, no laughter drifting in from another room, just the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the faint chirping of birds outside my window. For a moment, I lay still in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the silence settle around me. 70. The number felt heavy in a way I had never experienced before, not because I feared getting older, but because of everything that number carried with it. 70 years of living, 70 years of loving, 70 years of giving, and somehow, in that moment, it all felt very far away. I slowly pushed myself up, my joints reminding me that time had indeed passed, and walked toward the window. The early morning light spilled softly into the room, painting everything in a gentle glow. Savannah looked the same as it always had, calm, warm, unchanged. And yet, something inside me felt different. I made my bed the way I always did, smoothing the sheets carefully, just as I had done every morning for decades. Old habits stay with you, even when everything else begins to shift. In the kitchen, I brewed a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, just the way Daniel used to drink it. I poured it into my favorite mug, the one with the small chip on the rim that I refused to throw away, and carried it to the small table by the window. From there, I could see the street, neighbors passing by, cars moving slowly. Life continues, as it always does. I took a sip of my coffee and allowed myself to think, not about today, but about all the birthdays that had come before. I remembered being a little girl, sitting at a table decorated with paper streamers, my mother placing a homemade cake in front of me, while my father stood behind her, smiling proudly. I remembered the years with Daniel, the quiet dinners, the simple gifts, the way he would always pretend to forget, only to surprise me at the last moment with something thoughtful, something meaningful. And then I remembered the birthdays after Marcus was born, the drawings he made with crooked lines and bright colors, the way he would run into the room, barely able to contain his excitement. "Happy birthday, Mom." His voice would fill the entire house, Those were the years that mattered most, because they were filled with love, pure, uncomplicated love. I held on to those memories for a long time that morning, longer than I probably should have, because they felt safer than the present. Eventually, I set my cup down and reached for my phone. I stared at it for a moment, waiting, hoping, but it remained still. No messages, no missed calls, nothing. I told myself it was still early, that Marcus would call. Of course he would call. He always did, even if it was later in the day, even if it was brief. He would not forget. I refused to believe that. So I placed the phone beside me and tried to carry on with my morning. I watered the plants, adjusted the curtains, tidied the living room, even though it was already clean. Anything to keep my mind from returning to that quiet, waiting feeling. But it stayed with me, lingering, unsettled. By late morning, I found myself back at the table, my phone once again in front of me. Still nothing. A small part of me began to feel uneasy. Not fear, not yet, just something I could not quite name. I looked around the house, at the photographs on the walls, at the life I had built, at everything that had once felt so full. And for the first time, I allowed a thought to surface that I had been avoiding for years. What if I mattered less now? What if the life I gave everything to had moved on without me? I shook my head gently, pushing that thought away. No, that could not be true. Not today. Not on my birthday. I stood up, walked to the mirror in the hallway, and looked at myself. A 70-year-old woman stared back. Lines where there once were none. Silver where there was once dark hair. But there was still something else there. Strength, dignity, a life that had meaning. I straightened my shoulders slightly, because no matter what happened today, I would not let it take that away from me. Still, deep down, I held on to one simple hope, that before the day was over, my son would remember, that he would call, that he would show up, that I would not spend this day alone. I did not know then that this would be the day everything I had been ignoring would finally reveal itself. And once it did, there would be no going back. By early afternoon, the quiet had become something else. It was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, the kind of silence that sits with you, presses against you, makes every second feel longer than it should. I found myself glancing at my phone more often than I wanted to admit, not obsessively, just enough to notice the absence. Still no call, still no message. I told myself he was busy, that he was probably in a meeting, that he would call when he had a moment. But there is a difference between waiting with patience and waiting with doubt, and slowly, without realizing it, I had crossed that line. I walked into the living room and sat down in Daniel's old chair. The leather had softened over the years, shaped by time and memory. It was the place I always went when I needed to think, or when I needed to feel close to him. I looked at his photograph on the shelf nearby. The same gentle smile, the same calm eyes. "How would you handle this?" I whispered softly. Of course there was no answer. There never is. But somehow, saying it out loud made the moment feel less empty. I sat there for a while longer, long enough for the quiet to settle again. And then, without overthinking it, I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered over Marcus's name for just a second, not because I was unsure, but because I already sensed what the call might bring. Still, I pressed it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then his voice came through. "Hey, Mom." It was quick, rushed, like he had already been in the middle of something before answering. I straightened slightly in my seat, forcing a small smile that he could not see. "Hi, sweetheart." There was a brief pause. Not long, but noticeable. "I just wanted to call and remind you," I began gently. "Today is my birthday." Another pause. Then quickly, almost too quickly, he responded, "I know, Mom. I was going to call you." I nodded to myself. Of course. There it was again. That feeling, small, subtle, but unmistakable. Like something was just slightly out of place. "I was thinking," I continued, keeping my voice light, "maybe we could have dinner tonight. It's been a while since we really sat down together." This time, the pause was longer, long enough for the silence between us to become uncomfortable. I could almost hear him thinking, searching, choosing his words. "Mom," he finally said, "tonight might be difficult." My hand tightened slightly around the phone. "Oh?" "Vanessa already made plans," he continued. "We've got a reservation. It's something important." Important. The words stayed with me. I swallowed slowly, keeping my voice steady. "I see. It's just tonight," he added quickly. "We can do something later. Maybe this weekend. We'll celebrate properly then. This weekend. Another day. Another time." I had heard those words before. Many times. "Yes, of course," I said quietly. "You understand, right?" he asked. That question. It always came with the same tone, as if understanding was expected, as if my feelings were something that could simply be adjusted, set aside, postponed. "Yes, Marcus," I replied. "I understand." There was a brief silence after that. Neither of us are quite sure what to say next. "Well, I'll call you later," he said. "All right. Happy birthday, Mom." "Thank you, sweetheart." And then the line went quiet. I lowered the phone slowly and placed it on the table beside me. For a moment, I just sat there, still, listening to the silence return. But this time, it felt different. Not empty, not peaceful, but clear. Clear in a way that made everything easier to see. Because it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. The hesitation, the distance, the way the conversation felt like something he needed to get through, rather than something he wanted to be part of. I leaned back slightly in the chair, my eyes drifting toward the window. The afternoon light had shifted, softer now, quieter, and in that moment, something inside me changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Enough for me to realize that this was not just about a dinner. It was not just about one evening. It was about something deeper. Something I had been avoiding for far too long. I had spent years telling myself that everything was fine, that Marcus was just busy, that life had simply taken him in a different direction. But now, sitting there alone on my 70th birthday, I could no longer ignore what was right in front of me. I was no longer part of his priorities. Not the way I once was. not the way I had believed I always would be. And that realization, it didn't come with tears. It came with stillness, the kind that settles in your chest and stays there. I looked down at my hands, resting quietly in my lap, steady, calm, but different, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't making excuses anymore. I wasn't filling in the gaps with hope. I was simply seeing things as they were. And once you reach that point, something inside you begins to shift. You stop waiting. You stop hoping. And without even realizing it, you start deciding. I stood up slowly and walked toward my bedroom. If I was going to spend this evening alone, I would not spend it sitting in silence. I would not spend it waiting. I would not spend it feeling forgotten. No, not this time. I opened my closet and reached for the navy dress Daniel had always loved, because if there was one thing I understood at that moment, it was this. If I was going to face this day, I would do it with dignity, even if I had to do it alone. I stood in front of my closet for a long moment before choosing the dress. The navy one, the one Daniel used to say made me look elegant without trying too hard. I ran my hand gently over the fabric, remembering the last time I wore it. A family dinner. A different time. A different feeling. I changed slowly, carefully, as if each movement mattered more than usual. I fixed my hair, added a touch of makeup, and placed the pearl earrings into my ears. When I finally looked at myself in the mirror, I did not see someone fragile. I saw a woman who had lived, a woman who had endured, a woman who still deserved to be seen. I picked up my purse, turned off the lights, and stepped out of the house. The evening air was warm, carrying that familiar southern calm that usually brought me comfort. But tonight, it felt different, quieter, heavier, as if something unseen was waiting for me. I walked slowly to the curb and called a taxi. When it arrived, I gave the driver the name of a restaurant I had not visited in years. A place Marcus once took me to when he got his first promotion. I remember how proud he looked that night, how he insisted on paying the bill, even though I knew it stretched his budget at the time. "This is just the beginning, Mom," he had said, and I believed him. As the car moved through the streets of Savannah, I watched the city pass by through the window. Familiar places, familiar roads, but everything felt distant, like I was watching someone else's life from the outside. When we arrived, the restaurant looked just as I remembered, elegant, warmly lit, the soft glow from inside spilling out onto the sidewalk. I paid the driver, stepped out carefully, and took a moment before walking in. Not because I was unsure, but because something inside me felt unsettled. Still, I pushed that feeling aside and opened the door. The warmth of the restaurant wrapped around me instantly. Soft music played in the background. Voices blended into a gentle hum, the kind of place where people came to celebrate, to connect, to share moments that mattered. A hostess greeted me with a polite smile and asked if I had a reservation. I shook my head gently. "No, but if you have a small table available, that would be fine." She nodded and began to lead me inside. And that is when it happened. At first, I did not notice. It was just a glance, a passing moment as my eyes adjusted to the light. But then something pulled my attention back. I turned my head slightly, and I saw him, Marcus, my son, sitting at a table near the window. For a second, my mind did not fully register what I was seeing. It felt too sudden, too unexpected. But then the details became clear. He was dressed well, relaxed, smiling, and he was not alone. Vanessa sat beside him. Her hand rested lightly on his arm. Her posture is calm, comfortable, at ease. Across from them, her parents, laughing, talking, raising their glasses, celebrating. I stopped walking, completely still. The hostess turned slightly, confused. "Ma'am?" she asked softly, but I did not respond, because at that moment, everything else faded away. The music, the voices, the movement of people around me, all of it disappeared, and all that remained was that table, that scene, that truth. My son, who had just hours ago told me he was too busy to have dinner with me, was sitting right there, celebrating, without me. The realization did not come with a loud reaction. It came quietly, like something settling deep inside my chest, heavy, final, unmistakable. I watched him for a moment longer, not searching for answers, not hoping I was mistaken, just seeing clearly. The way he leaned in as Vanessa spoke, the way he smiled, the way he looked completely at ease. There was no stress, no urgency, no sign of the important plans he had mentioned earlier. Just comfort, just ease, just choice, because that is what it was. A choice, not a conflict, not a misunderstanding. A choice. The hostess gently touched my arm. "Ma'am, would you still like a table?" Her voice brought me back. Slowly, I took a breath, a steady one, and nodded. "Yes, somewhere quiet, please." She guided me to a table in the corner, far enough away that I could not be seen easily, but close enough that I could see everything. I sat down carefully, placing my purse beside me. My hands were calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes when something inside you has already begun to shift. A waiter approached and asked if I would like something to drink. "Just water," I said softly. My voice is steady, controlled. He nodded and walked away, and I sat there, alone, on my 70th birthday, watching my son celebrate with another family, as if I did not exist, as if I did not matter. I thought I would feel anger, or sadness, or something overwhelming, but instead, what I felt was clarity, a quiet, undeniable clarity, because at that moment, everything I had been trying not to see was right in front of me. There were no excuses left, no misunderstandings, no space for doubt, just the truth. And sometimes, truth does not break you, it wakes you up. I picked up my glass of water when it arrived and took a small sip. My eyes never leave that table, not because I wanted to watch, but because I needed to understand. And as I sat there, something inside me changed, not loudly, not suddenly, but enough to know what happened next would not be the same as before. I don't know how long I sat there watching them. Time lost its meaning at that moment. It could have been minutes. It could have been longer. All I know is that I could not look away. Not because I wanted to, but because something inside me needed to fully understand what I was seeing. Marcus leaned back in his chair, laughing at something Vanessa's father said. It was an easy laugh, relaxed, the kind of laugh that comes when you feel completely comfortable, completely at home. I had not heard that laugh from him in a long time. Vanessa reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. He held it, naturally, effortlessly, as if it belonged there, as if everything about that moment, that table, that life, was exactly where he wanted to be. A waiter arrived at their table carrying a small cake. Soft candlelight flickered gently across their faces. Vanessa smiled. Her mother clapped softly. And Marcus leaned forward and helped light the candles. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not sharply, not painfully, but deeply, because now I understand. This wasn't just dinner. This was a celebration, a meaningful one, important enough to plan, important enough to reserve, important enough to replace me. I watched as they began to sing. Their voices are low but joyful, blending together in a way that felt whole, complete, and for the first time that evening, I truly felt like an outsider, not just physically, but emotionally, like I was standing on the outside of a life that once belonged to me. Looking in, the waiter placed my plate in front of me at some point. I hadn't even realized I had ordered. The food sat there untouched, warm, carefully prepared, but completely unimportant, because nothing in front of me mattered anymore. Everything that mattered was across the room. I thought about the years, all of them, the nights I stayed awake when Marcus was sick. In the mornings I woke early to prepare his meals before school. The sacrifices Daniel and I made without hesitation, without complaint. We never asked for anything in return. We didn't keep score. We didn't expect repayment, because that's not what love is. But there is something you do expect, not consciously, not selfishly, just naturally. To be remembered, to be valued, to matter. And sitting there, watching my son celebrate without me on my 70th birthday, I realized something I had been avoiding for years. I no longer held that place in his life. Not the way I once did. Not the way I believed I always would. I was no longer central. I was secondary, optional, replaceable. The thought should have hurt more. It should have broken something inside me. But instead, it settled. Quietly, firmly, like a truth finally finding its place. I took a slow breath and leaned back in my chair. My hands rested calmly on the table. No trembling, no panic, just stillness, because something inside me had reached its limit. Not of love, not of care, but of denial. I had spent years protecting him, defending him, explaining his absence in ways that made it easier for me to accept. He's busy. He has responsibilities. He doesn't mean it. But now, there was nothing left to explain, nothing left to soften. No version of this moment that could be misunderstood. This wasn't distance. This wasn't the circumstance. This was a choice. And once you see that clearly, something changes. I looked at Marcus one more time, really looked at him. not as the little boy I raised, not as the son I remembered, but as the man he had become. And in that moment, I understood something I had never allowed myself to accept before. He had built a life that no longer included me, not fully, not meaningfully, and the hardest part wasn't that he chose it. It was that I had allowed myself to believe otherwise for so long. I reached for my glass again and took a small sip of water. It felt steady, grounding, real, and as I set the glass back down, a quiet thought formed in my mind, clear, simple, unavoidable. If I no longer had a place in his life the way I once did, then perhaps it was time to stop holding on to the one I thought I still had, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of understanding, because sometimes the moment that feels like loss is actually the moment you begin to see yourself clearly again. I glanced down at my hands, then slowly I reached for my purse, and that was the moment everything began to change. My hand rested on my purse for a moment before I opened it, not because I was unsure, but because I understood, even then, that what I was about to do would change everything. There are moments in life when you stand at a quiet crossroads. No one sees it, no one announces it, but deep down you know. You know that whatever decision you make next, there is no going back. I slowly reached inside and took out my phone. The screen lit up softly in my hand. Familiar, simple, but in that moment, it felt like something more. Like a tool, like a line between who I had been and who I was about to become. Across the room, nothing had changed. Marcus was still laughing. Vanessa was still smiling. The evening was still unfolding for them as if everything was perfectly in place. And perhaps for them, it was. But for me, everything had already shifted. I unlocked my phone and opened the banking application, the one Marcus had helped me set up years ago, back when he said, "Mom, don't worry, I'll handle everything." And I let him, because I trusted him, because I believed that trust was enough, because I believed that love and trust were the same thing. But they're not always. The screen loaded slowly, and as it did, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Don't panic. Clarity. For years, Marcus had been managing my finances, paying bills, making decisions, handling investments. He spoke about it with confidence, with certainty, as if it was all simply part of his responsibility as a son, and I allowed it. Not because I couldn't learn, not because I wasn't capable, but because I thought it brought us closer, because I thought it gave him a reason to stay connected. But now, sitting there alone on my 70th birthday, watching him celebrate a life that no longer included me, I understood something I should have realized long ago. Dependence is not connection, and silence is not peace. I navigated through the app slowly, carefully. Each screen, each account, each number, familiar yet distant, like something I had once owned, but handed over without question. My finger hovered for just a second, not out of fear, but out of awareness. This was not just about money. This was about control, about dignity, about understanding my place and choosing to redefine it. I took a breath, and then I began. I changed the access permissions, removed his authority, shifted control back to myself, one step at a time, deliberate, precise, final. There was no rush, no urgency, just quiet determination. Around me, the restaurant continued as if nothing had happened. Glasses clinked, voices rose and fell, music played softly in the background, and at that table, they continued their evening, unaware, completely unaware that something fundamental had just changed. When I finished, I sat back slightly and looked at the screen. Everything was now under my control again. Every account, every decision, every future choice. Mine, for the first time in years. Mine. I locked the phone and placed it gently on the table, and in that moment, I felt it. Not relief, not satisfied, but something deeper, a quiet sense of balance being restored. Because this wasn't about taking something from him, it was about reclaiming something I had slowly given away. My independence, my voice, my place in my own life. I looked across the room again. Marcus was still smiling, still comfortable, still unaware, and for the first time that evening, I did not feel like an outsider watching something I had lost. I felt like someone who had finally stepped out of something that no longer belonged to her. I reached for my purse and stood up slowly. My movements are steady, controlled. There was no hesitation now, no uncertainty, because once you see things clearly, once you understand what needs to be done, you don't question it, you act. I took one last look at the table, not with anger, not with sadness, but with clarity, because this was not about them anymore. This was about me, about who I was, about what I would accept, and what I would no longer allow. I adjusted my dress slightly, lifted my chin, and began to walk, not toward the exit, but toward them, because some things need to be said, and some moments deserve to be faced. Each step toward their table felt steady, measured, not rushed, not hesitant, just certain. The closer I got, the clearer everything became. Their voices, their laughter, the soft clink of glasses, the glow of candlelight reflecting across their faces. For a moment, it almost felt like I was walking into a scene that had nothing to do with me, like I was just another guest passing by, until Marcus looked up and saw me. The change in his expression was immediate. His smile disappeared, replaced by confusion, then discomfort, then something else, something closer to realization. Mom? My name did not come with warmth. It came with surprise. The kind of surprise that reveals more than words ever could. Vanessa turned slightly, following his gaze. Her expression tightened, controlled, careful. Her parents looked at me next, curious at first. Then I was uneasy. The table went quiet. I stopped beside them, not too close, not too distant, just enough to be present, just enough to be seen. Good evening, I said calmly. My voice was steady, even. There was no anger in it, and somehow that made the moment heavier. No one responded right away. They were waiting, trying to understand why I was there, trying to predict what I would say next. I let the silence sit for a moment, not to make them uncomfortable, but because I no longer felt the need to fill it. I didn't mean to interrupt, I continued. I just wanted to stop by for a moment. Marcus shifted in his seat. Mom, I thought you were home. I was, I said simply, and then I decided to come out. Vanessa glanced at him briefly. A silent exchange, a question without words. I could see it clearly now, the dynamic, the alignment, where I stood and where I did not. I hope you're all having a nice evening, I said, my eyes moving gently across the table. No accusation, no raised voice, just observation. Yes, we are, Vanessa replied softly, polite, measured, careful. Of course she was. Everything about her was always careful. I nodded once, then looked back at Marcus. I just came to wish you a good night, I said, and to let you know something. His brows pulled together slightly. What do you mean? I reached into my purse and took out my phone. Place it gently on the table between us. The screen lit up, calm, unassuming, but at that moment, it carried weight. I've made some changes, I said. Marcus looked down at the phone, then back at me. What changes? I've taken back control of my accounts. Silence. No immediate reaction. Just a pause, as if the words needed a second to settle. I've removed your access, I continued, just as calmly. And from now on, I'll be managing everything myself. The shift at the table was instant, subtle, but undeniable. Marcus straightened. Vanessa's posture stiffened. Her father leaned back slightly, and her mother's expression sharpened, as if assessing the situation more closely. Mom, what are you talking about? Marcus asked. There was tension in his voice now, not loud, but present. I'm talking about responsibility, I replied, and understanding. His jaw tightened slightly. You didn't need to do that. I was handling everything. I know, I said, and I appreciate what you've done. That seemed to catch him off guard, but I didn't pause. I just realized something tonight, I continued, that it's time for me to take care of my own life again. Vanessa's mother spoke next. Her tone was controlled, but firm. Mrs. Carter, I don't think this is the right time or place to discuss something like this. I turned my head slightly toward her. Not defensive, not reactive, just a present. You're right, I said. It isn't. And then I looked back at Marcus. This isn't about the money, I added softly. It never was. He frowned, confused now, trying to piece it together. Then what is this about? He asked. And for the first time, I let the truth sit fully in the space between us. It's about being honest, I said. It's about being present. It's about choosing what matters. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to interrupt, nothing left to soften. I glanced briefly at the table, at the cake, at the glasses, at the moment they had created together, and then back at him. You made your choice tonight, I said quietly, and that's okay. Those last words landed differently, because they were not said with anger. They were said with acceptance, and acceptance is often harder to respond to than anger. Marcus opened his mouth slightly, but no words came out. For once, he didn't have an explanation ready, and I didn't need one. I won't keep you any longer, I said. My voice is still calm, still steady. I picked up my phone from the table, slipped it back into my purse, then took a small step back. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. No sarcasm, no bitterness, just the truth. I turned then, not slowly, not dramatically, just done. And as I walked away from that table, I did not feel small. I did not feel invisible. I did not feel like someone who had been left behind. For the first time that night, I felt something else entirely. I felt in control. I didn't rush as I walked out of the restaurant. There was no need to. For once, I wasn't trying to catch up to anything. The night air met me gently as I stepped outside. Cool, still, quiet in a way that felt completely different from the silence earlier that morning. This silence didn't feel heavy. It felt clear. I stood there for a moment, just breathing, looking out at the street, at the passing cars, at the soft glow of lights reflecting against the pavement. The world hadn't changed. Everything around me was exactly the same. And yet, everything inside me felt different, not broken, not empty, but settled. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding on to something that was no longer there. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't hoping. I wasn't explaining someone else's behavior just to protect my own feelings. I was simply accepting what I had seen, accepting what I had understood, accepting what had already been true for a long time. I walked slowly toward the curb and called for a taxi. When it arrived, I got in quietly and gave my address. The ride home was calm. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't replay the moment over and over in my mind. I didn't question what I had said or what I had done, because there was nothing left to question. Clarity has a way of removing doubt. When I arrived home, the house greeted me the same way it always had. Quiet, familiar, still, but it no longer felt empty. I turned on the light in the living room and placed my purse on the table. Then I walked slowly to the window. The same window where I had sat that morning. The same view, the same street. But I was not the same woman who had been sitting there just hours before. That woman had been waiting. This one was not. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down in Daniel's chair. The leather creaked softly as I settled in. I looked at his photograph again. That same gentle smile, that same steady presence. And for the first time that day, I smiled back, not because everything was perfect, but because something inside me had finally aligned. You always said I was stronger than I believed, I whispered quietly. And maybe you were right. I leaned back slightly and closed my eyes for a moment, letting everything settle, not pushing anything away, not holding anything too tightly, just allowing it to be, because that is what acceptance looks like. It doesn't fight, it doesn't resist. It simply understands. My phone buzzed softly on the table, once, then again. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Marcus. Of course. The realization had probably reached him by now. The shift, the change, the fact that something had moved and would not move back the same way. I opened my eyes and glanced at the phone. It continued to light up with calls, with messages, urgent, insistent, but I didn't pick it up right away. not out of anger, not out of punishment, but because for once I was not reacting. I was choosing. I let the phone rest there, allowed the moment to exist without rushing to fill it. And in that space, I understood something that had taken me 70 years to truly learn. Love does not mean losing yourself. It does not mean shrinking to fit into someone else's life. It does not mean accepting less than you deserve just to keep the peace. Love, real love, requires respect, and without that, it becomes something else entirely. I finally reached for the phone. I looked at the screen. Marcus's name, repeated, again and again. I held it in my hand for a moment, then gently placed it back down, because tonight was not about fixing anything. It was not about explanations. It was not about going back. Tonight was about something much simpler and much more important. It was about choosing myself for the first time in a long time, completely. I stood up slowly and turned off the light in the living room. The house grew quiet again, but this time, the quiet felt right. As I walked toward my bedroom, one thought stayed with me, clear, unshaken, final. I had not lost my son that night. Not truly, because the truth is, he had been drifting away for years. What I lost was the illusion that things were still the same. And sometimes, letting go of an illusion is the only way to see your life clearly again. I lay down in bed and pulled the blanket gently over myself. The room was still, peaceful, and for the first time in a very long time, my mind was quiet too. No questions, no doubts, no waiting, just rest. Because this wasn't the end of something I needed to hold on to. This was the beginning of something I should have claimed long ago, my own life. And this time, I would not give it away. If you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever given your all to someone and still felt like it wasn't enough, I want you to be honest with me. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have done the same thing? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of something you've been through, make sure you subscribe, because here, we don't just tell stories. We tell the truth people are afraid to say out loud. And your story might be next.